Kia ora. I'm Stephanie Laird, Investment Advisor at Venture Taranaki. As you will be aware, the New Zealand Government has commenced work to manage the Tui Oil Field assets and plan for decommissioning. New Zealand Petroleum and Minerals, as part of the Ministry of Business, Innovation, Employment, MBIE, are leading this project. Due to the specialist nature of the project, the government will be procuring services to perform this role. Due to the significant nature of this project for the region, we have Susan Baas and Hayden Berkers have graciously offered to join us today to hear a little bit more around this project. Susan is the Petroleum and Minerals National Manager and will be providing an overview of the project. And Hayden, MBIE's procurement specialist, will be presenting on the procurement considerations in relation to this project. I know Susan and Hayden are looking forward to sharing their presentation and answering any questions you may have. Please feel free to submit your questions in the Q&A function. You'll find that at the bottom of the screen. You can do this anytime during or after the presentation. These questions will then be answered, time permitting, at the end of the presentation. Just letting you know, this is an open forum and this webinar will be recorded and made widely available for anyone that wasn't able to make it here today. Thank you, and I will now hand over to Susan.
Thank you, Stephanie. Kia ora koutou, good afternoon, and thank you for joining us today to talk about the Tui project. As Stephanie said, my name is Susan Baas and I am the National Manager of Petroleum and Minerals at MBIE. I started in that role in December 2019, and given the circumstances of the tamarind liquidation at that time, I also quickly inherited management for that project. Hayden Berkers is a Senior Procurement Specialist who works for New Zealand Government Procurement and Property and has been provided to support us with the Tui project. First of all, I'd like to say thank you to Justin Gilliard and Stephanie and her team at Venture Taranaki for hosting us with this webinar. We want to use the time to provide an overview of the project and then more detailed information about how the New Zealand Government is and will be procuring resources and services to perform it. Okay, so now to our presentation. Hayden's going to load up our slides to share with you. I will speak initially about the project and then Hayden will provide more detailed information about procurement. We will each speak for roughly 10 to 15 minutes and then there will be time for questions. Because we're providing the presentation online, we asked for questions to be submitted in advance and we have some of those already to answer. We'll also try to take extra questions live and you should submit those via the chat. But some of those questions might be difficult for us to answer in the online environment or we might run out of time. And we can respond to those using the FAQ section of the Tui project website. I'll share details of that website later. I also have a final slide to reflect on the challenges, opportunities, issues and learnings from the Tui project, which is designed to form part of my presentation tomorrow to the Taranaki Energy Forum. But if we have time to cover it today, I'll cover that material. Okay, so on to the next slide. To briefly introduce the assets and the project. This slide shows us, and many of you will be more familiar with this than I am, so I'm sorry if it sounds like I'm presenting you with stuff that you already know, but this slide shows us the location of the Tui oil field within the Taranaki Basin. As all of you will likely know, it's an offshore field with 8 subsea wells and 4 flow lines connected to the Whipso Umaroa. The next slide shows the key infrastructure. The Whipso belongs to the BW Offshore Group via a company registered in Singapore. The wells, flow lines and other subsea assets now belong to the Crown. Production at the field stopped in late 2019 when an oil sheen was identified and the Environmental Protection Authority issued an abatement notice. The Crown does not plan to recommence production and so the job now is to decommission the field. Any decommissioning requires a marine consent issued under the EEZ Act, a process that we understand takes around 12 months to complete. There is a provision in the EEZ Act that allows us to follow a quicker process to obtain a ruling, but only for certain activities. We are hoping to use that quicker process to allow the Whipso to depart early but this requires us to deal with the subsea assets in a way that ensures that the environmental effects are minor or less than minor. I'll now run, on the next slide, I'll now run briefly through some of the key features of the Tui project. In a physical work sense, this is a relatively simple project for those with oil and gas expertise. However, the tamarind liquidation and the fact that the Crown is involved makes it quite a complex undertaking with a number of strands of work and a wide variety of stakeholders, agencies, and potential service providers. Just running through some of those features now one by one. The Crown's initial work related to the tamarind liquidation, and we had to respond reactively to Tamarind's disclaimer of the assets to the Crown. On that second bullet point, obviously, health, safety, and the environment are critical features of this project, and we have had to work hard with the various regulators to ensure that we understand the relevant obligations and respond to them. Third bullet point, as a treaty partner, the Crown has a special obligation to Māori, and we have dedicated time and energy to working with Te Kahui o Taunaki Iwi as mana whenua to ensure that they can participate actively in relation to the project. On the next bullet point, I'm mindful that there were a number of losers in relation to the tamarind liquidation, but BW Offshore has been a particular victim, and the team there remain very frustrated that they haven't been able to take their FPSO away yet. We are working closely with BW, and this work is complex and time-consuming. Next bullet point, as government, we are bound by rules about employment and procurement that help ensure that the process is robust and fair, but those rules can sometimes add extra work, complexity, and time. Second to last bullet point, we're also operating in a difficult context given COVID and the current pressures on the oil and gas sector. And finally, Tui is the first decommissioning to be conducted in New Zealand for some time, and it will inevitably serve as a precedent for future projects. So on the next slide, I'm now going to run more specifically through the expected phases of the Tui project, and I'll provide an update on where we're at now and potential future timeframes. I do need to note here that the Tui project continues to be very dynamic, and any update can only ever be at a particular point in time. So the information that we're providing today is likely to change, and that's why we are providing regular updates on the Tui project website, which you can see linked on this slide. Please be mindful of this. The activities, procurement, and timeframes that we predict may well change. I appreciate that this makes things difficult, and it might give the impression that the project is not running smoothly, but the reality is that this project is complex and aspects of it change. Now, the first phase of work that we carried out, which I've labelled number 1 on the table, was to respond to the tamarind liquidation, provide advice to ministers, track BW's efforts to obtain rulings to demobilise the FPSO on their own, and to have the Tui assets disclaimed to the Crown. I just note here for clarification that the Crown currently owns the Tui subsea assets, but the Tui permit remains with the liquidators. That first phase of work is now complete. The next 3 phases of work noted on the slide are all being run in parallel. As part of what I've labelled phase 2, we have had to take stock of the assets received, place insurance, work with the various regulators to comply with the law, take advice and create a plan to deal with the assets, anticipate what future procurement might comprise, and conduct negotiations with BW. As specific updates, we're delighted that Melanie Soul started with us this week as the Tui Project Health, Safety, Environment and Compliance Manager. We have conducted an RFI to gather information from the market for procurement. Negotiations with BW are still underway. Recently, we went to market for an ROV survey, and we hope to sign a contract and complete that work shortly. And to help us with this urgent phase of work, we engaged Petrofac to provide specialist technical advice. Now, we have had some questions about Petrofac, which we'll answer later in the presentation. The next phase of work, which I've labelled number 3 on the slide, is to plan for, consent, and implement an expected demobilisation of the FPSO. This will also include works to ensure that the subsea assets remain safe and secure until decommissioning can occur. For example, flushing of the flow lines and ensuring that the wells have adequate barriers in place. We would like to put in place a head contractor to oversee all of this work for MB, but we need to ensure that we properly scope that role before we go to market. That arrangement will also provide us with the next phase of specialist technical work, drawing Petrofac's current contract to a close. We have also engaged the New Zealand staff at SLR Consulting to prepare applications for the environmental rulings needed for demobilisation. And the final and most major phase of work will of course be to carry out the decommissioning of the field, most likely requiring a drill rig in country. We anticipate that there will also be longer term monitoring of the field to ensure that the works have been effected. Now that we have completed that initial RFI, we have started planning for this phase of work. As to timing, at this stage we anticipate to complete the ROV survey within the next few weeks, to provide to market an RFP for the demobilisation head contractor role within the next 1 month, although I would note that the scope and timing for this still remains a work in progress. Hopefully to complete demobilisation within the first half of calendar year 2021, and to complete decommissioning during a future summer period, as yet undetermined, but of course as soon as possible. We are currently recruiting a number of project roles, including a project director, technical project manager, government project manager, and a stakeholder and consenting lead. Applications for those roles have now closed. The recruitments are progressing well, and I expect that we might make appointments within the next few weeks. The project director will take over my role, so you will likely receive future updates from that person, and I will return to my regulatory role. We are also currently working with Te Kahui on a partnership arrangement that allows them to participate actively in the project, and we hope to finalise details of that soon. Before I hand over to Hayden, I just want to draw your attention to the fact that we do have that TUI project website and a TUI project email address. And the website already has an FAQ section where we have previously responded to those procurement questions that we were aware of. So now I'll just hand over to Hayden, and then I might be back at the end to help answer some of these questions.
Cool, thanks Susan. So just for a little bit of background, my name's Hayden. I've been brought over from New Zealand Government Procurement to support this project in terms of delivering the procurement elements. My typical role is as sort of in the advisory team to agencies. So I work a lot on a wonderful topic called the Procurement Rules and helping make sure that agencies are actually implementing them correctly and that we're following the latest government guidance. Just a quick note before we begin, I have unfortunately had to have a root canal this morning, so if I look like I'm in pain, it's not just because we're talking about procurement rules, but it's actually because of the dental work. But anyway, I am one of those weird people who's slightly passionate about procurement rules because I think they're important for effectively setting baseline transparency and good procurement practices for government. And really what I want to talk about here at the moment is just to give you an understanding of the context that we operate in, with really just a critical message that if you're engaging with MB in terms of procurement for this project, we are not a commercial operator. We do not operate like a commercial operator, and we have a lot of different drivers to what you're probably used to engaging with in this industry. Obviously, operating an oil field is not something that is core Crown business, and we're still learning about basically all that entails as we go along. We've obviously got Susan's team who look after the National Petroleum Minerals, so they understand I think oil and minerals better than most other people in government, but this isn't our core business and we're still learning. But where we're at is effectively we need to operate under the government procurement rules. There's about 71 rules that we need to follow in our procurement processes. But even more important than that, there's actually 5 key principles that I think underline exactly what we're trying to do. And those principles, they're available on our website. You can go to procurement.gov.nz and really read a lot about these rules and about what we're focusing on. But really the principles focus on things like being fair to suppliers, making sure that we're playing by the rules and giving equal opportunity to everyone. It's worth noting that one of the key focuses of the rules is that we need to ensure that we're doing open tendering for contracts over $100,000, except in a few key cases where we need to get those effectively signed off by our senior decision makers and cover things such as highly urgent procurement, things to make sure that things are safe or situations like that. And we've already had a few of those on this project, particularly as the Crown was effectively displaying these assets and we've had to deal with that. Part of the other reason that I'm quite passionate, I guess, about these procurement rules is that we've recently had a change in 2019 to bring in the 4th edition, which is kind of changed. In my view, it's a new generation of procurement, and that government's no longer been instructed to purchase on best value for money, but actually on a new concept called best public value. And I just want to talk briefly about public value because I think it is really important, and that we're no longer just looking at what is the quality and what is the price of goods and services that we purchase, but actually what are the outcomes that are achieved by it as well. Because we recognise that that is quite important for government spend, that it's not just about making sure that we deliver this cheaply and efficiently, but actually what are the wider things that are accomplished by what we do, by our purchasing decisions, and even by the way that we engage with the market. It's quite important here that what I really want to stress is that this is a balance. So it's not just about MB focusing only on the outcomes, or MB focusing only on the price, or MB focusing only on the quality of the solution, but we need to actually balance how we deliver all of those three things. And particularly, we want to make sure that the outcomes are actually tailored to the project. So this isn't about us having a core set of outcomes that government is trying to deliver, but we want to focus this on what is actually important outcomes for Taranaki, and what are important outcomes for New Zealand through this. And I want to talk a little bit about that later on. But yeah, I do just really want to stress that MB is not here to effectively cut costs and deliver this at the lowest price. We want to make sure this is done correctly, and we want to make sure it's actually done with Taranaki, not just separate from them, and not just at a cut price rate, because that's not what we're about. That's not what government is driving government, and that's not what's driving this project. So just a really quick note as well, because this is a really common query that we get in terms of engaging with New Zealand businesses. It's no secret that in the current climate, we're getting a lot of basically interest from New Zealand businesses and sort of wanting us to include things such as waiting for New Zealand businesses. It's worth drawing your attention to Rule 3 in the Procurement Rules, which basically outlines that we're actually not allowed to discriminate against any supplier, including foreign suppliers. So we must give every supplier, regardless of what their postcode is, an opportunity to bid for this work. This isn't just because that's good procurement, but that's also tied to our free trade agreements. So not only if we were to effectively give free marks to New Zealand businesses, that wouldn't necessarily be good from a procurement angle, but it's also not good from our free trade agreement angle. But really, we do recognise that there is distinct benefits that the government wants to seek. So things like encouraging local jobs, local employment, local training, those things are valuable, and they're valuable outcomes for our process, and we want to make sure that we're actually valuing them. And in addition, it's also worth noting that we're not just trying to value them in terms of the initial discussion or the initial contract that we sign, but also actually make sure that that's reflected in our subcontracting arrangements. Because this is important, this is something that we want to focus on, but the way that we focus on it isn't by asking what your postcode is, it's by asking what you will do for the community. And you'll see that in our tenders coming out, particularly the major tenders. That'll obviously be in a balance. We're not just asking you about how you engage and how you work with the community, but we're also going to be asking about your commercials and your quality of solution. And if you have any questions or queries on this, we are quite available to, I think, discuss this, because this is an important point. So please don't be expecting that you're going to have a tick box in the tenders to say, yes, I'm a New Zealand business, we want to get this additional work, but we will actually be evaluating the contributions that are made by businesses to the community. So I want to just talk briefly, and Susan might need to stop me talking because I'll honestly talk about procurement rules all day if someone lets me. But really what I wanted to focus on is that we've developed some procurement principles for Tui in terms of the way that we're looking at engaging with this project. Because of it's quite a unique project, it's high profile, we want to make sure that it's done right. So these procurement principles sit alongside the government procurement principles which apply to all procurements. And really what these do is they try to help guide us in terms of our decision making, not in terms of just who do we select, in terms of who's successful in the tender, but actually how do we prepare the tenders to make sure that we are actually buying what is going to be best for the New Zealand public, which is at the end of the day, as public servants, that is our job. So the first principle that is actually pretty, I think, straightforward is that health, safety and environmental considerations are a strict bottom line. We're just not willing to compromise on that. Fortunately, I think this is actually pretty widely accepted in this industry. I don't think anyone has come to us and said, "Oh, Hayden, have you thought about cutting some corners? We can save you some money." That's just not how this industry, based on what I've seen, rolls. but it is an important consideration and just not something that we're going to compromise on. So you'll likely see in our tenders that things like health and safety are going to be assessed as pass or fail because they're just that critical. And if you're not able to meet or provide evidence or basically convince the decision makers that you are going to be able to meet the health, safety, and environmental standards, then we're probably not going to be able to give you the work. The second principle that we've got there is that we want to get the best of balance of public value for New Zealand and Taranaki. Venture Taranaki have been immensely good to us, and that they've also suggested that we actually deliver this through a co-design process with the Taranaki community. Because at the end of the day, you know, we can sit here in Wellington and think about what a good outcome for Taranaki might be, but we'd actually rather hear from the Taranaki community in terms of what outcomes are going to be most important to you, and make sure that we actually balance our procurement decisions to help drive those outcomes for the things that actually matter most to the people of Taranaki. And effectively, once we've got what those specific outcomes are, they'll be incorporated into our tenders in terms of things like we'll be asking, typically for our major tenders, for items like a local impact plan, where providers will be required to actually outline in detail how they're going to engage with the community, how they're going to provide a local impact, and how they're actually going to meet those outcomes. Because that's important too. It's not just about getting this done, it's actually about doing it with Taranaki, not just for Taranaki. Which kind of brings me to the next principle, which is that we want iwi and stakeholders to be engaged and involved, not just consulted. So even along those lines, we've got an iwi member coming on board as part of the project team, not just as a representative, but as a genuine member of our project team. And we're looking to continue ongoing engagement with the Taranaki stakeholders as well. We don't want to just go out for consultation's sake. We really want to hear what is happening for Taranaki and actually how we can tailor our outcomes in our process to get what is going to be the best public result here. And our final principle there is we operate fair and transparent processes under the rules. There'll be no surprise to anyone. I've kind of included it there because I'm a little bit more of a procurement often. But really this is important, but because it's at the heart of what public procurement is making sure that we have fair processes that give everyone a genuine opportunity to win the work. And it's not just something that we want you to take our word for. We're looking to appoint an external firm who actually manage the whole of life, probity and fairness components for our processes. And they'll also actually be available to take concerns from the market and bring those up with the ministry and investigate them and actually hold us to account to make sure that we're designing our processes fairly and to actually meet the outcomes that we've set out to do. Because we do take this seriously. We're not here to run bung processes. I certainly don't get out of bed in the morning to come here to run processes with no meaning. We want to give the market the opportunity to compete because that gets a better result. Competition gets a better result. And that is really what we're here to do. And we want to provide the assurance to the market that that's what we're doing. Cool. So in terms of how do you actually engage with the team? So under our procurement rules, all of our open tenders will be facilitated through our government electronic tender service. I think a lot of suppliers in this industry are already familiar with that, but if you're not, I'd recommend following that link, having a look at GETS, registering a supplier account, and you can subscribe to the UNSPC codes. We're typically just basically using the standard oil industry ones. I don't remember them off the top of my head because they're like 12 digits long. But if you go through and you find the relevant oil industry UNSPC codes, and you subscribe to them, then any open tender that we post will be on there. There is some tenders that we won't potentially be using GETS for. So for example, if we're purchasing from a pre-existing panel, so for example, all government consultancy, then those tenders don't necessarily go in GETS. So you might not see every single tender, but all of our major tenders, particularly for things like a head contractor, you've probably already seen the ROV survey, those tenders will all be on GETS, and we'll use GETS as the system to engage with them. And we do ask that you do basically manage your engagement with us through GETS. Just because of the amount of interest, it's actually quite hard for us to be picking up the phone and talking to every supplier, because quite frankly, I just run out of time and not be able to actually do the procurement work that needs to be done. In terms of upcoming opportunities, so in addition to putting them on GETS, we also have them on our website. So I'd encourage you to actually look at that website to digest the information, because we are trying to be as transparent as possible and put the information that we think is relevant to the market onto our website. We're not here to hide anything. We actually want to engage with the market and make sure that you guys are aware of the issues and of the information that we're dealing with as well. In terms of the specific upcoming opportunities, I think Susan's mentioned that we are looking at doing the head contractor services for demobilisation within the next month. As it turns out, obviously I'm coming fresh into this industry, that's a bit more complex than it sounds like to me as a layman. So we're working a lot on the scope of that and on the timing to make sure that we actually get that right as we go to market, as opposed to wasting the market's time by actually purchasing the wrong thing, because no one wins in that situation. Other things that we've got coming up is we've got an annual benthic monitoring survey. So I've got the scope for that and shouldn't be too far away from being able to launch that into the market, as well as probity services. It's a fair point that the probity services is likely to come from an all government panel, so you might not see that one on GETS, but we are doing it and we will be engaging with the relevant providers there. And also, once we've got the probity firm on board, we'll actually send out a notification to the market with their details, and say that actually if you've got any issues or any concerns about our processes, you can come and talk to the ministry. We're absolutely happy to address your concerns, but you can actually also go and talk to this external auditing firm who will be able to provide some level of assurance, or at least come back and ask MBIE the right questions, and ask questions based on what the market is looking at. And we've also got an assurance project coming through there as well. So I think that's probably enough of me talking, but I think we're quite keen to address the questions that have come through, and any questions that have been posted so far. So I might hand back to Stephanie.
Thanks so much, Hayden. Appreciate that. Thank you very much for the people that pre-submitted some of the questions. So I have some of the pre-submitted questions that we'll get to first. With the first one, can you confirm the scope of the Petrofac contract and the process of how this was awarded?
Sure, so I can answer that, Stephanie. I think as I alluded earlier, MBIE engaged Petrofac to provide an initial tranche of specialist technical expertise required for the early phase of the project. And this work was initially to prepare a report for us on the current condition of the wells and the flow lines to understand whether we needed to do anything urgently or what we needed to do leading up to demobilisation. And it also gave us some advice about options for demobilisation. Petrofac have continued to provide us with some technical expertise, for example, in relation to the ROV survey. That tranche of work will conclude if and when we appoint the head contractor for the demobilisation. So I think there have been some suggestions that we've already engaged Petrofac for the full scope of the whole project, and that's not the case.
Great, thank you, Susan. The next question, is there any truth to the rumour that MBIE are not interested in engaging with anyone that has legacy, connection or prior experience with the Tui field?
Sure, so thanks, Stephanie. I think Hayden and I would just like to really emphasise that this isn't true. For example, we've appointed Melanie Soul as the Tui Project Health, Safety, Environment and Compliance Manager, and Melanie's come to us direct from employment with Tamarind. I guess what we haven't done is simply go directly to those individuals and companies that have been involved with Tui in the way that a new private sector operator might have done if it was taking over these assets. So I suppose a private sector operator might have just got straight on the phone to people who really know about these assets and engaged them and really got moving. But because our appointments need to follow government procurement and employment rules and processes, we've had to add an extra degree of formality to our work. And so people who do have experience with the TUI assets have had to apply for work or follow the usual processes for employment roles or procurement.
No, that makes a lot of sense. Thanks, Susan. Can you provide a timeline for when the head contractor tender will be released? Yeah, so I'd really,
we with all of these procurements, we want to provide the best information that we can, and the best information that we have right now is that procurement will be released within the next month. But as I just emphasised before, the scoping and timing for this role remains a work in progress.
Yeah, and it's worth noting that I think in the most recent comms that we sent out, that will provide the market with a week, basically warning that this tender is coming. So you'll see another advance notice come out when MBIE is effectively ready to go. So hopefully it won't be a surprise when it comes out, but we are expecting it within the next month.
Thanks both. So you might have already covered this off during the session, but for the tender evaluation, is there a scoring or weighting system applied? And if so, is there a weighting applied for spend to New Zealand for Taranaki-based companies?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, we're not able to weight effectively whether you're a New Zealand business or not, or provide that with kind of credit through our evaluation process. It will be a weighted attribute, so we will have specific percentages for different components of the solution, such as your experience, your capability, your capacity, your health and safety. But with the way that we will be looking at things such as local outcomes is through a local impact plan process, which will be weighted and balanced against the other factors as well. So it's not going to be 100% on your local impact, but it's also not going to be 0%, and it's definitely not going to be 1%. We do want to make sure that that's weighted appropriately and that people are actually able to show that as a valid differentiator.
Great. So can you explain a little bit more about how the relationship with Petrofac has been managed in relationship to third-party sensitivity information submitted to MB as per the RFI?
Yeah, so I can probably take that one. Government cares quite a lot about information security. In particular, commercial information that comes through our procurement processes is locked down pretty securely. So we haven't provided any insights or information or even the names of the people who responded to an RFI to Petrofac, as we would do with any supplier. We take that quite seriously, and we would absolutely not do that in any kind of situation. And that goes for all of our procurement processes, where we operate under quite strict information security provisions.
Of course, where we do enter into contracts with third parties to provide services, those third parties will be bound by the kind of usual government standard confidentiality obligations as well.
It's really helpful, thank you. So there's known integrity issues with some of the wells. How are these aspects being addressed?
Yeah, that's a good question. So as I said, when we first took over reluctant ownership, I might say, of the subsea assets, that was the issue that was foremost on our mind. And that's why we commissioned Petrofac on an urgent basis to assess the information that we had about the wells to understand what the current condition was and what we needed to do. So we got that kind of urgent stock take of the condition of the assets. And then we also got this advice about how to move forward with demobilisation. So that advice helped inform what we needed to do next. For example, conducting the ROV survey. And it also gave us some comfort that, that there wasn't kind of gas bubbling out of the wells immediately. So that kind of locked down what we needed to do immediately and what we needed to do leading up to the demobilisation. And then that's the technical advice that we've taken to date and will continue to date to design demobilisation to ensure that those assets remain safe and secure until decommissioning can occur. The Environmental Protection Authority test makes it pretty clear that the effects of any activity that we carry out have to be minor or less than minor. So that sets a pretty high bar that those assets need to be left in that kind of condition. I'm not a technical specialist myself, so I won't go into the nature of the work that will be conducted as part of the demobilisation, but the plan is that as part of that activity, work would be done to ensure that each of the wells has the right barriers in place to leave them, to enable them to be left for a period of time until we can bring a drill rig in country.
Okay. So just moving on to, in the presentation, you discussed that there was some roles that MB were filling. Just a couple of questions on that. Were the roles advertised in Taranaki, and will they be filled by New Zealanders?
Yeah, they're good questions. Okay, so I think I referred to 4 roles. 3 of those were advertised in both Wellington and Taranaki. That's the project director role, the technical project manager role, and the consenting and stakeholder lead. There's 1 role that we only advertised in Wellington. That's the departmental project management role, and that's because that's a very much, we've isolated the aspects of the management of this project that relate to it purely being a government role and an MB type project, and we really wanted that person to be based in Wellington. Will the roles be filled by New Zealanders? Yeah, that's an interesting question. Due to COVID, I think, although we didn't require that, so any advertised role that gets advertised within the MBIE, the person has to have the right to live and work in New Zealand. Ordinarily, that's our only requirement, so a role could be filled by someone, say, on a work visa. And, you know, we're, as New Zealand government, totally satisfied with that. Because of COVID, it probably means that these roles will be filled by New Zealand citizens, or at least people who are in country, just because of the reality of us needing someone who's available in the short term. Does that answer that question, do you think, Stephanie? That's a bit.
Yeah. So it sort of leads on to, will MBIE have an office in New Plymouth to manage the aspects of the project?
Sure. So the short answer is I'm not 100% sure. At the moment, Venture Taranaki have generously agreed to host our one New Plymouth-based staff member, and that's Melanie. So Melanie's sharing space in Venture Taranaki, which we think is really great because it'll allow Melanie to be well connected in with important stakeholders. We are just going to have a look at how many more New Plymouth people we end up with and how they're best housed. So yeah, to be determined at this stage.
Well, it's nice having Mel in the office here, anyway.
So MBIE does have a normal regulatory office in New Plymouth, which it shares with WorkSafe, and we won't be housing our TUI people in that office because it's not appropriate for the TUI people to be sitting in an office that is shared with WorkSafe regulatory staff.
Yeah, thank you. So how will the government avoid, I guess, the occurrence of something like the Tui Oil Field issue in the future with the existing offshore oil and gas developments?
Yeah, thanks, Stephanie. That's a really, really important question, and it's another thing that's been keeping us busy. I'm just having a look at the TUI decommissioning website, and I might just see if I can share my screen just briefly.
You need me to stop?
Oh, no, I can't. You need to share your, if you stop sharing yours, I'll share mine. Sorry, I'm not an expert at this. There it is. Okay, so this is just one snapshot of the, sorry, I've got the questions there too. One snapshot of the an extract on the TUI decommissioning project website, which you can find by Googling TUI decommissioning. If you scroll down that page, you'll see the section that's called legislative change. And this highlights some work that a very important work that our policy team have been doing with Minister Woods and other cabinet ministers. And that links through to some policy decisions that have been made by ministers to implement fast track changes to the Crown Minerals Act, to ensure that extra protections are put in place for petroleum permit holders. Of course, that law hasn't been passed yet, just policy decisions have been made, so we'll have to enable that to track through the House, including after the election, but the policy team at MBIE are working hard on that, and that's our best means to ensure that this TUI situation doesn't happen again. Although, sorry, I'm just thinking there's one more thing I should add, which is that the reason that Tamarind acquired the assets from AWE is that they did that by way of a loophole in the law at the time, which is they didn't transfer the asset, they didn't transfer the assets, they transferred the shares in the company. That's called a change of control, and the law has already been changed to ensure that that can't happen again. So any transfer of assets or change of control does require regulatory approval. This legislative change that's outlined on the website here will ensure that extra protections are put in place. Can't guarantee it won't happen again, but some steps have been taken to try and prevent it happening again.
No, I appreciate that and appreciate you sharing your screen there with us, Susan.
Trying to unshare, stop share.
The next question, will MBIE make the procurement evaluation criteria for all packages publicly known as part of the RFP, RFQ, RFI process?
The short answer is yes. We typically, in all of our procurement documentation, we have a specific section on our evaluation approach, which will outline the questions that we're asking, the relative weighting, and any sort of applicable evaluation criteria or standards. Sometimes it can be a little bit hard to get sort of quite specific evaluation criteria, particularly when we're asking for a proposal, but it will be effectively how you actually meet the question that are asked. And the way that I like to run tenders is to provide sort of an open opportunity for providers to actually submit a genuine response, but also to have sort of in particular, please address these points. So we will typically score your proposal against how you address those points, but also actually how you address the question as a whole. Yeah, hopefully that helps.
Okay. Another question on, I guess, the roles, in particular, asking around the project director role. It didn't require any oil and gas experience. Is the priority to fill the roles from within MB? And are people with strong industry experience been sought out to fill the project roles, or are you aiming to use people within the government with experience?
Sure. So the project director role, I can't remember on the position description, but it certainly did allocate industry experience as desired. It was just a case of balancing that against ensuring that the person also has experience managing significant projects and commercial undertakings. So oil and gas experience and relevant project, major and complex project experience will be strongly desirable for that candidate. The technical project manager is the person who we think will have the most in-depth oil and gas experience. Plus, of course, we rely on third parties heavily for technical expertise. There's no priority to fill those roles from within MB. If there had been, we would have just advertised them internally. We absolutely anticipate that those roles will be filled by all externals. And yeah, government experience actually would be really advantageous for this project, but it's hard to find people who have the balance of oil and gas industry experience and government experience.
Yeah, okay. On the insurance services, can you please advise on the expected scope of the assurance services?
Sure, so I'm just reading off some notes, so I'm not an expert on assurance services, but it's expected that there will be 3 layers of assurance. It's departmental assurance, so project health and tracking, probity assurance in relation to our procurement, and operational quality assurance, and for example, IQA on our demobilisation and decommissioning activities. Great.
Okay, on to the next question. We're powering through the questions here.
There's lots of them.
So thanks everyone for participating and you guys for answering. What process will the recent requests for expressions of interest in the particular the project feed into?
Yeah, so I'm presuming that that is referring to our request for information, which we've honestly, I just want to say we've been actually really thrilled with the amount of engagement that we got back from that. It was effectively far more than we'd anticipated, and probably far more than we had the capacity at the time to be able to actually really review quite a lot of valuable information. It's clear that a lot of time has gone into that. We're now effectively at the point where we've read all of the RFIs, and we're sort of taking insights from that and actually using them and informing our planning for the different stages of the project, particularly some of the procurement elements around how we're actually going to look at engaging with the market, what kind of information is required, the different timelines that we need to be in the market for, and sort of all the different procurement elements. And we will be going back to everyone who's responded to the RFI with a bit of a thank you letter and things that we've found useful from the expressions of interest, from the request for information. Those 2 things are quite different in government speak. Yeah, so overall we are actually really thrilled with that, and the information has been really helpful to our team.
Great. I would just say that if other people have got useful information to share about the project, information that they are willing to impart that based on their expertise, then we're always grateful to receive that information via the decommissioning email, and we can set up some sort of, provide some sort of confidentiality assurance if you like. You know, people from around the world have been quite generous in providing this information to us, and given that it's the taxpayer ultimately funding the project, I'd really encourage people to share information or risks or concerns with us if you have them.
Yeah, that sounds really good. So back to Petrofac, could you please confirm what role they'll play in respect to the evaluation of the ROV survey contractor, and more importantly, the head contractor? Will they be involved in the selection of the process, and if so, how?
Yep, so I'll answer that. So in terms of the ROV survey, so Petrofac did provide a technical report to MB, basically providing technical advice on the ROV survey. We don't have anyone in MB who's an expert in ROVs, which is probably not a huge surprise. So Petrofac had provided some sort of external technical support there, and that report is used in our evaluation process as an expert. And just to be clear, Petrofac will not be involved at all in the assessment of the head contractor bids. That would be completely inappropriate for a number of reasons. Petrofac are open to bid for the head contractor, but they're not going to be involved in that engagement at all. And it's also important to note that even when we've had Petrofac in as technical advice, they haven't actually been scoring members. At the end of the day, that decision rests with MB, and MB needs to make the call based on the information that we have at the time.
Someone's just suggested that it might be a good idea to stop the screen share as they can't see us. So if that's nice of them to want to see us.
Now I think we also get to see Hayden, so that's nice. Because he's been on mute. We haven't seen his face yet.
We've got a high-tech arrangement with a shared mic between me and Susan. This is about as tech as government gets, so enjoy it.
Fantastic. Okay, so now we're all on screen. Next question. What if the FPSO remaining in place were the best options for the decommissioning of the field? How does that relate to the execution of parallel work streams?
Yeah, so I take this question to mean, did we have a think, or have we thought carefully about whether the FPSO should remain in place until the field is ultimately decommissioned? And we did weigh that up as an option, because I understand that ordinarily an oil field would be decommissioned with the FPSO in place. The issue for us here is that this is a complex project, and BW Offshore are extremely keen to take their FPSO away. And it is quite a late life vessel. At one stage it had quite a large quantity of oil on board, but most of that's since been consumed. But there were some risks to having the FPSO remain in place. So we, to date, have weighed up the kind of relative health and safety risks and environmental risks of maintaining the FPSO in place, in terms of having a crew on board, having the environmental risks of an ageing vessel there, financial cost to BW or the Crown of maintaining that there, and on balance we have together decided that it's better to try and allow the FPSO to leave. It does remain a risk that we might not be able to get a ruling to allow that to happen, and we will, some of the options of what happens with this project are a bit uncertain. So I guess, sorry, to answer that question, we did consider that option, but after weighing up all the different risks, we decided that the demobilisation was the best option, as long as we could meet the Environmental Protection Authority's test of ensuring that the environmental effects of the assets remaining in place are minor or less than minor. I'm not sure I understand the second bit about how does that relate to execution of the parallel work streams. I think we're trying to pursue demobilisation, and at the same time we're then looking ahead to a future decommissioning and trying to get ready and have that consented to occur as quickly as possible.
Great.
Hopefully that answers the question.
Yeah, and it probably answers a couple more as well that have asked around sort of that situation. So we're back to a question on the current project vacancies. Is this this an expected duration of these positions?
So I do have someone in the room here who I think is going to help me. I think we had to guess how long these roles would be needed for. I think we have advertised the project director for a 12-month period, the consenting and stakeholder lead for 12 months, the departmental project manager for 12 months, and the technical project manager for 6 months. That's because we were anticipating that the technical project manager might just need to be on board for design and setup of demobilisation. Of course, any of those roles can be extended if appropriate, but that was our kind of best guess of how long we would need those people for.
Great. No, that sounds good. So next question. You mentioned the reliance on the third-party technical support in the delivery of the project. Do you expect there will be other minor contracts placed for such support outside the 4 key RFQs mentioned in your presentation?
Yeah, so I think probably it's important to note that we are doing the recruitment, particularly for some more basically technical roles to the technical project manager, but also the project director, and I think they'll be in a much better place to advise in terms of what are their sort of remaining gaps around technical advice. So I guess my answer to that is very possible that we might need additional technical advice, but the form of that is, yeah, we're not quite sure yet, but we will communicate with the market when we know what that might look like. Great.
Okay. I think we've got 10 minutes. We've got time for a couple more questions, but I'm just going to put up a brief poll just to sort of understand if this has been helpful to people that are on with us today, and if you'd be interested in any future webinars on this topic, and that just helps us understand you know, the feel of the room here. And then I might actually, Hayden or Susan, did you want to pick some of the last questions? Is there, just conscious of time with so many questions, if there's any other ones that you feel would be? Great, I'll just give you guys a couple of more seconds to fill in that poll for us, and that'd be really helpful. Okay, so I'll stop that now. Thank you very much. Okay, so if we go back to some of the remaining questions. So I think this is quite a good one to be one of our last ones. What will be, or how can we see, the measure of success factors or targets for the project?
Yeah, I included that because I thought that was a good challenging question. The short answer is that we are required to account for the spend of government money, and we do have, as part of what's called our appropriation, which is our allowance to spend government money, we do have a performance measure, which is simply designed to ensure that we achieve all deliverables for the project year on year. And our government, MB steering group will determine what those, will define those deliverables, and we'll track those. I'm interested about this question about measurable success factors or targets. I guess if people had feedback on what they think they should be, we're always welcome to take their feedback. I think the short answer is that we're trying to get the job done as quickly and as cost effectively as possible, with quality as a bottom line. I don't think we were otherwise intending to impose any additional success factors or targets, but we're always happy to take that feedback via the decommissioning email.
That's fantastic. And I think that that's probably a good question to almost leave us on. You had offered to answer some of the other questions that we didn't get time for today, so we can make them available as well. Just to I guess thank Susan and Hayden for your time and answering all them questions and really giving us more insight into the project and understand how people can get involved going forward. I will also send out the link to that website that you both alluded to during the presentation, and it has some great content on where you guys are at and some other questions that people have asked, and of course the contact details to make sure people can still get in touch with you guys. So just wanted to say thank you everyone for joining us.
Thanks, Stephanie.
Thank you. Bye.